Hello and welcome back, Bitfrogs. Glad to see you're all still at it. And now that we've had some time to process the somewhat disturbing addition of slimes to our game, with Pim befriending them no less, it is time to give their meaningless selves a greater purpose: killing Pim. By the end of this video, this is what our project is going to look like, so let's get to it. First off, we need to verify that everything is running and that we got both an instantiated player and enemy in level 1. And once that checks out, we can run the game and witness how our pink buddy corners the helpless slime through sheer aura generation. And once broken, these blue blobs can also be taught to carry the player around. But beneath that thin veneer of civility and subservience hides a murderous sociopath who wants to put a frown on that face. We'll start by creating a signal inside of player called died. Signals are sort of inter-node communication without truly connecting them. Basically, it's sort of like a radio tower that emits a signal that any other node in the game can pick up if they tune in to that frequency. This signal, ominously named, will indicate that Pim has passed on. Once we've declared the signal at the top of the player.gd script, we'll move on down to our variables and we're going to add _dead as a boolean. Booleans, as you probably recall, they are either true or false, which means that it's more like an on-off switch than a number or a value. Obviously, this boolean will turn on or off depending on if Pim has, well, died or not. But what's with the underscore? This isn't technically a necessity when working in Godot, since Godot itself doesn't care, but it can help you, the coder, keep track of which variables are quote-unquote local, i.e. only used in this particular script, and which you would prefer to interact with other scripts. Underscore to me shows that this is meant as an internal variable for this script, even though, frankly, Godot doesn't care about that or even enforce it. But anyway. Next up, we modify our old friend physics process by telling it that if dead is true, then Pim should stop being controlled by the player, but should still obey the laws of gravity. Plus, you know, all the other physics stuff, hence why we call on move and slide. And then we just return, dropping out of physics process until dead is no longer true. We're going to be making two new functions today, and the first one is going to be called kill. Pretty straightforward. Kill is going to declare the variable playAnim, another boolean, as true inside itself, and we're going to see why in a second. Now, Pim being who he is, he can't really die if he's already dead. So if dead is already true, and I should point out here that if you ever ask for boolean and you don't explicitly ask if it's false, Godot will assume you're checking if it's true. Nothing in the function should be happening. But if dead isn't true, that's where the magic happens. If dead isn't true, first of all, we're going to emit the died signal. And this means that anything checking to see if their favorite radio broadcast died is on, will be able to tune into it. And now if you've been sneaky and checked out the files for this episode already, you will notice that there's actually nothing checking for died. And just like a VTuber desperately calling for attention with a going live message sent into the ether, so too is player.gd letting the void know that died in fact is happening. But that's not all that this function does. Because once it's sent out this zero view message, it will continue by stating that once an enemy kills Pim, it will check if playAnim is happening. And since it is happening, which we declared up in the parentheses of kill, Pim is going to do a small jump and his sprite is going to change into the dead sprite. Oh yeah, right, there's a new sprite. Of course, we haven't added this animation yet, so now's as good a time as any to jump on over to the player's scene, go to the animated sprite 2D, and add a new animation. You can rename it dead, and then add the new sprite from the updated sprite sheet, which, as always, you can find in the description below. Of course, since we're just using a single sprite for this, we just add that one. But if you decide to have more sprites in your death animation, that's certainly doable. Don't worry about it. It might loop though, so maybe you want to have it play just once. I'll cover that in a later video. Now, with all of that in place, if we try running the game, we'll notice that nothing has changed. Of course, Pim is still best buds with our angry blue blobs, and there's a pretty good reason for that. There's nothing set to trigger Pim's death. He is, for all sense and purposes, immortal, and short of sending him into space to float around until he stops thinking, there's really no way to get rid of him. Enter our second function in player, with the highly advanced name Check Enemy Collisions. And just like it says on the box, this function will make sure to run whenever we hit an enemy. But how do we know if we do that? Hold your horses, bucko. First of all, we need to make sure that we've got our seatbelts on. If Pim's already dead, we shouldn't even bother running this function. So, if dead, return. And now that we know this won't be firing forever every frame Pim is touching a bad guy, we can look at the for loop. A for loop is a little control structure that repeats a block of code a fixed number of times. And in this case, it runs once for each collision that move and slide has registered this physics frame. If there are 3 collisions, the loop is going to run 3 times. If there aren't any, it doesn't run at all. The I here is just an integer index, 0, 1, 2, and so on, up to get slide collision count -1. So we're going to use it to ask Godot, give me collision number I for this frame. It's a lot of math, don't worry about it. Get slide collision count and kinematic collision 2D are built in Godot tools on character body 2D. You remember way back when I told you that we need to change Pim into our character body 2D, this is why. Get slide collision count tells us how many things we bumped into this frame, and get slide collision I gives us a kinematic collision 2D object describing one of those bumps. Easy, right? Yeah, well, from that object we call getCollider and store the result in a variable called collider. So essentially, collider is going to be what we collide with. Yeah, well, since we can collide with the floor and walls and ladders and enemies all in the same frame, we need to check every single collision we hit and see if any of them is an enemy walker. We need to do this every frame. And if we find that one of them is an enemy walker, we can call kill to be true, and then we can break out of the loop so we don't keep checking other collisions after we've already decided Pim is dead. So essentially, this is going to be running every frame, checking every single collision that Pim is experiencing, and if one of them is enemy walker, Pim is going to die. And since Pim is colliding with literally everything from the floor to walls to the ceiling, Pim is probably only not going to be colliding if he's in the air. So the loop looks at all the collisions this frame, but kill true only actually runs if one of those collisions was with an enemy walker. And that's what makes this little piece of code neat and focused. It's only checking for enemies and ignoring everything else the player bumps into. But it's still not working. And why is that? Well, as we know, a function isn't going to run unless it's a special case, like ready and physics process. So we need to call it somewhere. And since physics process runs more or less every single tick, that's where we're going to put it. We'll shove it in between move and slide and update animations, 2 functions that also happen every frame. There you go. Of course, if we did die, we don't want our sprites to update again until we explicitly tell the game that we can, so let's add a little if dead equals true return before update animation. That means that it's going to stop running until dead is no longer true. That way, Pim is not suddenly going to start standing in the air or something before he respawns. And now if we compile and run the game again, we can see that Pim will in fact die when he touches an enemy. And the dead animation triggers, and the player loses control over him, there's no respawning, so we have kind of soft locked the game until we reset it. But the code does exactly what we told it to. Or does it? Well, surprise, this is where we get our special guest star of this episode, Masks and Layers. You see, Way back when, we decided that if the enemy walker has a feeler out that detects a collision, it's going to turn around and head another way. This is great for pits and walls, not so much for enemy-on-player interaction. We want Pim to be killed, not have to kill himself, so if he's standing still, our plot is foiled. Now, how do we fix this? You'll be happy to know that this is honestly very easy to fix without using code, for once. We'll begin by going to the player scene and selecting the root node, the player node. Now over here in the inspector, there are two fields called layer and masks under collision. Layer tells us which layer the object is on, and mask which layer the object can detect. Think of layers sort of like how they used to do animation by hand. They would paint individual objects on separate layers of transparent paper, and then they would compose them into one single image. And the way it works here is that Pim is on the same layer as the slimes, not to mention the walls and the floors. And the default layer for the environment tiles will almost always be set to 1. But since that layer is detected by enemies, we don't want Pim there. So if we move him to layer 2, the rays that enemy walker sends out won't be detecting Pim. Pim, however, needs to detect layer 1, otherwise he will not be detecting the floor or the enemies, and just fall straight through them. So we put him in layer 2, and we put layer detection or mask layer 1 and 2. So in masks, we're going to put layer 1 and layer 2, just for the heck of it. Now, if we go over to enemy walker, we can check the two rays and confirm that they are only detecting objects on layer 1. And since the rays don't actually decide if Pim is hurt or not, this is handled by collision checking between two hitboxes, they're not gonna matter when we're deciding if there's a collision with the player happening. And now we can run the game and voila! Pim becomes frozen solid and gets pushed around by a slime. Perfect. It's the rules of nature. Now that we got player death handled, it is time to fix one of our oldest issues, soft locking. Soft locking means that the game keeps running, but the player is unable to continue past a certain point. In this case, ever since we created gravity, Pim has been able to fall into an inescapable void, meaning we've always needed to restart the game to continue testing. And now that Pim is also vulnerable to enemy attacks, this problem becomes even more apparent since no matter how he is killed, we can't keep playing. Now there's two things we're going to do in the kill function to make sure that we fix this. First, we're going to add a wait get tree create timer 0.35.timeout. Yeah, this little piece of code basically tells the function to hold its horses for about 0.35 seconds before it continues with executing the rest of its code. After that, we'll add getTreeReloadCurrent scene. And as you can probably guess, this reloads the current scene. And since Pim isn't a scene in this case, but an instantiated scene in level 1, which itself is instantiated in main, the whole scene, main, restarts, with Pim and the slimes back to where they started. 0.35 seconds is, though, honestly, not an awful lot of time, so if you want to experiment with this, you can change the number to whatever you like, because that's just how long it's going to take before the game does a hard reset. Still though, the way the corpse of our little guy is being manhandled by the slimes doesn't really sit right with me, so we're going to implement another little effect that happens when Pim touches an enemy. In the kill function, we'll turn Pim's layer detection, or his mask, to 0. This means that Pim, as an object, can't detect or interact with anything once he has died. Although, of course, other objects can still detect him unless we remove his layer as well, and we're not going to do that. Combining that with the little jump he makes when he dies, and we get an honestly pretty nice looking little death animation where he falls off the stage, so to speak. Well, now everything is fine. Oh yeah, the pits, of course. See, the problem here is that even though the game should reset if Pim dies, there's not really anything in the pit that lets us know that Pim has in fact died. Schrodinger's Pim, if you will. Now, we could put some more enemies down there, but there's a much easier way to handle this. We'll create a new scene, an Area 2D node, and we're going to name it Kill Zone. This will be our essential insta-death tile that will kill the player as soon as they touch them. Think spikes or pits in Mega Man. We'll add a little collision shape to Kill Zone and make it an 8x8 square, and then give it a script named after itself. But don't forget to change the extents to Area 2D and to give it a class name same as its name, so Kill Zone. Here in this new script, we'll add a ready, and inside of it, we're going to connect onBodyEntered, a function that we're going to define down below. In onBodyEntered, we'll define body as a node, any node. So any node that pops into the area of the kill zone will trigger this function. Now, if the node entering is player, we'll create a little variable called P for player, and that will trigger the kill function in player. But we're also going to send along a false signal. Remember how we had something called playAnim in kill, and how it was set to true? This made sure that the dead animation played if kill ran. But since the pit isn't going to do that, because it's completely unnecessary since the player won't even see Pim, we don't have to trigger the animation, so we can set the boolean to be false. Oh, yeah, and don't forget to check your spelling and indentation. As you can see here, I make this mistake a lot. Next up, we're going to instantiate our little kill zone tile into level 1, and just like we did with player and enemy walker, we'll place it where we want to detect if the player touches it. Ha, but wait, it's not working. Do you know, it's masks. It's always masks. Always. So quick fix to make sure that kill zone detects layer 2 where the player is, and it works. Pim is shot with an invisible bullet and unceremoniously falls off before he can even react. He's dead before he knows it. And now, since it works, we can actually move the kill zone to its proper location and clone it a couple of times. This isn't strictly necessary since Pim is a pretty big boy and this tile is going to be detected in the pit, but it's a good sort of, rule of thumb to do just to make sure that nothing kind of falls in between and soft locks the game. I do like to wear my suspenders and my belt after all. And now if we go back to player.gd, we can see the boolean I was talking about, play_anim. It will trigger unless the player hits a kill zone, in which kill will still happen, but the animation won't change to dead. But what if we want to change to wait time until the game resets? Well, maybe we want the player to fall for an uncomfortably long time before they respawn, and that's a pretty easy fix too. We're going to add another float called wait time in the declaration of kill. And this means that we can set it to be 1 second as a default death timer, but over here in kill zone, we can alter the reset timer to be longer or shorter, but just including a value when we call on the function. And with that, we're basically done with the coding for this video. But here's a couple of little things that might help improve our experience. First of all, I'm sure you've noticed the thin blue line at the top left of the screen whenever we play the game. Well, it's not actually whenever, but when we have the collision boxes activated in the debug menu. This is actually the camera walls being shown, so if you turn off this mode, it won't be visible. And the camera walls aren't actually visible, but we get the outline of them. And the outline is always going to be 1 pixel outside of what we see. Also, I'm sure you've noticed that horrible flash whenever you respawn. And that's actually Godot clearing the viewport with the default clear color, which in our case is blue, and then a new frame drawn with the tiles and objects. If we don't want that to happen, there's a couple of fixes for it. Right now, if you want it to be less egregious, you could just turn the background black and then paint in all your tiles manually. But that is still going to create a little bit of a flicker, but it's going to be less annoying. In the next video, when we're implementing lives and game overs, we're also making a fix that hides this problem for us, so if you want to wait for it, you'll get it in a week. Even so, for now, good job. Today, we took a few brave steps into handling death conditions, for loops, masks, and layers, not to mention timers. Even though our game is still very simple, I would say it's definitely starting to feel more and more like, a real game. Good job sticking with it, and I'm gonna see you again in the next week. Bye bye.